Get going. Welcome to another episode of BHBA Family Law Presents Direct Examination with Dan and Lauren. Along with Lauren Youngman from Youngman Reichstein, I'm Dan Bemmel, financial advisor and certified divorce financial analyst. During each episode of our show, we explore our guest's personal and professional history and dig into a meaningful topic. Please continue to join us for our upcoming episodes, always at 12:30 p.m. live on Zoom. Kendra Thomas and Gina Kang on July 6th, Tony Storm and Tigran Palian on August 3rd, Lisa Meyer on September 7th, Neil Hirsch on October 6th, Melanie Mandels on November 2nd, and Judge Susan Lopez Giss on December 7th. We're really excited for the rest of our 2022 lineup. Most of the links are already up on the bar's event calendar. Before we begin, a couple housekeeping announcements. You will receive your MCLE certificate shortly after the program. Please take a moment to complete the survey that is included with your certificate. The Family Law section is sponsored by White, Zuckerman, Warsofsky, Luna & Hunt, LLP, and Our Family Wizard. White, Zuckerman, Warsofsky, Luna & Hunt provide a wide variety of resources to complete almost any project, large or small. They also provide traditional accounting and tax practice services. We invite you to contact them to discuss your specific accounting needs and learn how they can be of service to you. Our Family Wizard is a secure co-parenting platform that supports divorced or separated parents in managing the daily responsibilities of raising children. Specialized features help parents organize routines, share files, track expenses and payments, check in and exchanges, send messages, and more, all while thoroughly documenting their activity. That's it for sponsors. Unfortunately, Lauren can't be with us today, but we are very, very happy to welcome Alexandra Leichter to the show. Alexandra is the founding partner of Leichter Leichter-Maroko LLP in Beverly Hills, where she practices law with her son Ariel and other great attorneys. She was born in 1947 in Hungary and became a U.S. citizen in 1966. A little more recently, she is a longtime lecturer and author on family law issues and is a member of every major family law organization. We have a lot to get to today, including some Yiddish lessons that I'm very excited about. But first, thank you so much for joining us, Alexandra.
It's my pleasure, and I'm sorry that Laura is, the poor thing, is away in Europe.
Yeah, we'll get through it, I think. So let's jump in. In doing a little research, we discovered that you are actually in a tie as the second longest tenured female certified family law specialist in LA County. That is pretty incredible. So I want to start there and talk a little bit about what the landscape was like for aspiring female attorneys in the late 60s when you started your journey in the law.
Well, to tell you the truth, one of the biggest problems in those days is women were not part of the legal landscape. Excuse me. In fact, when I applied to UCLA Law School and was rejected, I went into the dean's office, the dean of admissions or somebody, and I objected that I saw there were guys who majored in basket weaving, had a lower LSAT scores and lower GPAs than I did. Well, I majored in mathematics and blah, blah, blah. And the guy said to me, well, you don't understand. The state of California doesn't pay for girls to put on their apron strings when they finish law school. So here I am 49 and a half years later practicing, and I haven't yet put on my apron strings because I hate cooking. And I'd rather have somebody else serve.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's what DoorDash is for, right? I guess that's a change in the landscape since you started.
That's right.
So you talked a little bit about the application process at UCLA. Were there other hurdles or biases before you even got into law school?
The biases, I have to go back a little bit. I'm Hungarian, and I came to this country when I was almost 10 years old. from Hungary, and Hungary at that time was a communist country. So I had while women had the opportunities the same as men in Hungary because it was communist, so you could be a doctor, you could be a lawyer, an engineer, whatever it is as a woman, they did not discriminate against you. However, my parents were not members of the Communist Party, and we were Jewish. 2 strikes, you're out, you can't go to college. So I come to the United States, and we arrive in Brooklyn, and my parents put me into an ultra Hasidic school called Satmar Yeshiva. And I am asked, by friends, in this country, you're free to be anything you want to be. What would you like to be? I said, okay, I'll be president of the United States. And they said, well, that's the one job you can't have. I said, okay, I'll be a lawyer. And then from then on, I held court almost every day and at recess in my school, my Hasidic school, I was going to be a lawyer. And the principal used to drag me into his office all the time. You're not allowed to say that because girls are not allowed to do that. In fact, they didn't have a 12th grade so that you wouldn't graduate from a high school and be eligible to go to college. So that was forbidden. Eventually, I left that school, came out to California, graduated from high school. Now the next issue was my parents. My parents felt that a nice Jewish girl from an Orthodox home would be an embarrassment to their family if I went to college. And I was intent on going to law school. The only other career I ever thought of was to become a nun. And that was for about 24 hours when I heard that I couldn't be a nun because I was Jewish. So other than that, I always wanted to be a lawyer.
So if how did that impact your assimilation process? Did you latch on to certain parts of the culture? You talk about holding court in recess, but did that desire color your, I guess for lack of a better word, your immigration journey, or was it always far off in the distance?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I've lectured to university students about this, and especially at USC, where there are a lot of immigrants, children of immigrant families, and either they came to the United States as immigrant or their parents did. And the dichotomy, the problems between the children and the parents were exactly the kinds of things that I went through. Now, they weren't necessarily Jewish, they weren't necessarily religious, but the issues were still there. There is the mentality of the old timers, people who come from the old country, and they stick to what they know and that is comfortable. And then there are the new generations who want to be, like I did, American, free. And so that always colored my entire career in elementary school, in college, in high school, and in law school, because it was always, my father would come home from the synagogue Friday night, he says, such and such a person is engaged, some guy. I said, a mazel tov. To which he would say, what do you mean mazel tov? You could have married him. I said, why would I have wanted to marry him? He's going to marry someone else. And he would say, that's the problem. The only guy that's going to be that you would accept is the Chief Justice of the United States, to which I said, no, I'm going to be the Chief Justice of the United States. So these are, you can see the kinds of conflicts that happens, not just to me, but I think in all immigrant families, regardless where they come from.
And so has that also affected the organizations, the family law organizations that you've supported over your career?
What was always important for me as far as the organizations that I support, and this is primarily Levitt Quinn, which I'm a board member. I support Harriet Buhai. I support a lot of other organizations, but was always important to me because I identify with people who have nothing. I identify with people who have no power. I identify with people who have no idea where to turn. And these are organizations, especially Levitt Quinn, which is why I remained a board member all the time. They provide not only legal help in filling out documents and giving legal advice, but actually have lawyers who go with these people who wouldn't know what to do. I know what it's like being in court as a pro per, because I act as a judge pro tem. And I see what happens with these people who can't express what they really want to say, who can't make the judge understand, or they're ashamed, or they're fearful, or their language skills are lacking. So I think it's very important to support organizations like Levitt Quinn, Harriet Buhai, and all of these others. That's my point.
Yeah, tell us, if you don't mind, I want to go a little bit deeper into your experience, because I do think it's so unique, and I think it does really impact the types of clients you also choose to work with. You mentioned coming over here in 1956. I think you said you were 9 or 10 years old. Tell us a little bit about that, and why your family left, when obviously not being communist, being Jewish, those were the two strikes. But what was actually happening? What was that journey like?
Okay, let me tell you, I forgot a lot of it before. I had written it out about 25 years ago, and then I left it on my computer. What triggered me is the Ukrainian war, the Russian war against Ukraine at this time. I saw these kids looking out the windows of these trains as they were being shipped off, or they were taken from their home country, from anything that they ever knew, to Poland, to Hungary, to all of these other border countries of Ukraine. And I'm looking at these kids, and all of a sudden I remember me. I remember we escaped from Hungary. Right after the revolution, the Hungarian Revolution broke out, and it was put down by Russia. The Russians sent in the tanks. I saw the tanks shoot up the post office, everything else in my hometown. And then we escaped on a train. We walked across the border, hiked across the border, because we didn't know where we were going, what we were doing. There were flares going up, soldiers who were looking for you, ready to shoot you or get you in prison. And all of that was triggered, that memory was triggered for me by these kids, and who are escaping the Ukraine. And it's just, it's that adage, the more things change, the more they remain the same. So we eventually, we got to Austria, where we found my brother, who got lost on the trip. And we found him 3 days later. We stayed in Austria, in Vienna, for 7 months until we could get a visa to the United States. And we got a visa finally, and we arrived in New York. We were there. I hated it, I have to tell you. It was one of the ugliest cities I can imagine, Brooklyn. And, couple that with a ultra-Orthodox school I was pushed into, not good. So 4 years later, we came to California, and I said, I loved California so much, and I love to travel. So I want to travel 364 days a year. And the one day of the year that I have to call home, always Los Angeles. So there you go.
Yeah, well, I like to. The weather suits my clothes here more than it would in Brooklyn, that's for sure. Okay, so let's go back to kind of where we started today. Let's talk a little bit about law school. And when you went to law school, what was the environment like there at Loyola, right? The professors, classmates, if the UCLA application process was sour, what was it like when you actually landed and started pursuing your long-term dream?
I have to give all the credit to Loyola. We had 9 women and 300 men in my class. And to give you an idea, first day I arrive, I walk in, I drive in like I'm such a king shit. And the parking lot attendant says, "I'm sorry, you can't park here." I said, "Why not?" because only third year students are. I said, but you know, this is Pico Union. You can't park over here outside. Sorry. I walk into the dean's office, march right in, and I said, if you don't give parking permits to every single woman in this school, you're going to be responsible, and the diocese is going to be responsible for what happens to these women when they get raped or killed at Pico Union, which, by the way, at the time was the worst area in LA. He immediately gave all of the women. I said, oh, I think I can do this job.
Your first winning argument.
My first winning argument.
Love it.
But I have to tell you, Loyola was so good to the women. They were so responsive and so responsible. They insisted that large firms that would come on campus to interview will not be allowed to interview unless they also interview the women. Now, the fact that they, behind closed doors, they told us, look, you can tell us whatever you want. We don't hire girls unless they're for a secretarial job. But Loyola did the best they possibly could to make us feel like we're human beings. And that was the whole point. We didn't want to be separate. We didn't want to be special. We wanted to be the same human beings with the same human rights to a law school education as the boys did. So that's how Loyola was. They were phenomenal. I give them all the credit in the world.
And was it the same reception when you graduated and went into practice?
You're kidding.
I am. Yes. Tell us a little bit about how differently you were treated once you got out into the real world instead of the cozy confines of Loyola.
Oh, well, the truth of the matter is that all the women knew we had no future in any firm. They would hire, they offered us jobs as secretaries.
Even with the law degree, it was still secretary.
With the law degree, I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg said the same thing. She was offered jobs. And the first woman Supreme Court Justice, Sandra Day O'Connor, she also was offered jobs as a secretary. So we had no career, we had no nothing, but we had a law degree. We knew how to research. Now, we didn't know how to make our way to the courthouse, but we knew how to write appeals. And that is really what they gave us, the ability to go look for it, look out for ourselves, and look out for everyone else. So I opened my office together with with a classmate who was 49 years old when he graduated law school. And he came to me and said, look, we're both misfits. You're a girl, no one hires you. I'm old, no one hires me. And so we opened our offices, and that's how we started our practice. Now the rest was interesting history.
Well, let's get into it a little bit. What was it like? I want to hear a little bit about the path, but let's stick with the practice elements of it first. What was it like going into court for the first time, into the different departments as one of these pioneering women?
You know, I never thought of myself as a pioneering woman. I just thought of myself as a lawyer. I had a great law school education. I thought I knew what I was doing, and I really had one leg up on the guys who graduated with me. And that was that I had been a legal secretary while in the last 2 years of college and the first year of law school. To put myself through law school, I worked full-time. Then I got a job as a law clerk in a law firm that did general practice. And by the way, they actually did offer me a job the same as for one of the guys in my law school class for whom I got the job. But they were offering me a third less than what he was getting, and then increments, so that at the end of 2 years, he will have been making twice as much as I. And I said, well, I don't think so. But going to, the thing is this, I always loved litigation. I'm a fighter. I want to get up and fight for people. That was my whole idea when I was back at Satmar Yeshiva and I was holding court during recess and telling everybody how I'm going to protect and defend everyone. And that was my whole goal. My partner, my law partner, on the other hand, he got a heart attack shortly after we started the practice. And so he couldn't go to court. He did all the transaction work, which I hated. So he did all the wills, trusts, and contracts and everything else. And I went to court and shut my mouth off. And that's how it happened.
And what was the reception in court when you got there?
You know, it's very interesting looking back on it. The reception from the judges were very interesting. I would walk into court and the judge would say to me, a family court, for example, and I would, judge calls the case, I'd say, ready, and the judge would say, I see you, but where is your attorney? And then I would go to court upstairs on the eighth floor, I think was law in motion at the time or something or another, because I did everything, not just family law. Anything that walked in the door that required going to court, I was there. And these, you know, I'm walking down the hallway and there was these big, fat, ugly guys all congregating, looking at me, and they would say, little girl, are you lost? I said, no, are you? He said, well, what are you doing here? I said, I think the same thing you are. I'm going to court to argue my client's case, period. Okay, they looked at me like I was from outer space. But generally speaking, I don't think that I got a worse decision for my clients because I was a girl. I think once I got up there and I argued on behalf of the client, they took me very seriously. I had all the law that I needed to argue and more. So I didn't think for one moment that my clients were prejudiced because I was there as a girl representing them. I do remember one case very early in my career, and it happened to be a family law case. A guy comes to me and his 2 or 3-year-old son apparently witnessed a shooting in his mother's home where there was a party. And he said he wants to have custody of his son. I said, well, of course, you know, it goes without saying. And he says to me, what do you mean it goes without saying? I went to 10 other lawyers and they all said that 2 or 3-year-old, whatever the kid was, could not be with the father because the custody is never given to the father. I said, that's ridiculous. Now, did I know? No, I didn't. But I went to court, I presented the case, I got in full custody, and the mother, I think, a monitored visitation, end of story. Now we're talking back in the 70s when we had laws on the books that the tender age doctrine, where mothers always got custody of children who were like under the age of 5 or 6 or that. And I think all it was, I didn't know any better. I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to win. So as far as I was concerned, I went according to the law, I went according to the facts, went in there and fought, and the discussion.
So sticking with the gender in practice idea for just one more minute, when did you feel, I hope and assume it has changed at least somewhat since you started, when did you feel that tide start to turn, and how did it affect the broader legal community?
So first of all, I told you that in law school, we had 5% women. 2 years later, in my husband's class at Loyola, I think they went up to about 10%. And I saw the increase. And we saw the beginnings of appointments of women judges. And that's where the tide really turned. Now, I remember, what is her name? Judge Nancy Watson, who was the first, as I recall, certainly since 1972, when I first started practice, was the first woman judge. She was the supervising judge of the family law department. She was brilliant and she was tough and she took no nonsense from anybody. And so having her there was a wonderful example of, yes, you can get there, you could do that. But I do know that until more women became judges, there was always that little underlying, how should I put it, objection to women being in the courtroom. There was always that underlying fear that they really did not understand women's needs. And this was especially true in family law matters, but I did medical malpractice, and I did psychiatric malpractice. I did personal injury. And in all of those cases, you know, the lawyers would come over during recess and this. So little girl, where are you having lunch? I said, little boys, not with you. So, you know, those were always the underlying things, but it didn't make any, to me, I was so focused on what I needed and what I wanted to do that I didn't pay much attention to them.
So you mentioned medical malpractice. You mentioned kind of taking anything that came through the door from a litigation standpoint. What other kind of cases did you take right when you got out? What was your practice actually like in those early days?
Well, I'll tell you, you know, we opened our office. We were in this Fijian suite, which I don't think anybody remembers. It's like the WeWork situation. And we got 2 offices, and they provided receptionists, Xerox machines, and there were other attorneys there. So it was very helpful to have people that we can rely on. We can walk in and say, what do you do with this? So first day we opened up is the afternoon that we were sworn in, December 14, 1972. And so we had these 2 offices, and we had a Formica desk for each of us and pleather chairs. And then we sat, and a telephone. And then we sat there and we said, okay, now what? And that's, and then one day, shortly thereafter, somebody, I don't remember what the case was about, but somebody came in and wrote out a check for $500 as a retainer. I run into Paul's, my partner's office. I said, Paul, guess what? I just got a check for $500. I said, now what do we do? Because we had no idea what to do with the case. And so we hit the books with it. And the other thing, the way the practice went was that because I had been a legal secretary, I knew all the forms. I knew how to type things up. So comes 5, you know, from 9 to 5, I would wear my lawyer hat, and from 5 until whatever time I was finished, I would go in and type up all our pleadings, which were not form pleadings most of the time, and whatever else, points and authorities, whatever else we needed to do. So that's how the practice went. I did criminal law, which is, by the way, I had never met a lawyer before I went to law school. But when I was in high school, I read this book called The Defender of the Dam by Gladys Towles Root. And she was an amazing, amazing lawyer. I don't know if anybody on this recording is going to remember her. She was a criminal lawyer, defended people in rape cases. And she had this thing about getting dressed up very colorful in the making outfits in the colors that are most favorable to her client before she went to see them in prison. I mean, it was a nutty thing, but I was so, this was the only woman lawyer I had ever heard of or ever read about. And so I figured I was going to be a Gladys Towles Root. No freaking way. One of the, I did some criminal cases, and then I was called in to a case where the guy was accused of raping someone he just picked up. And so I started talking to him, and the guy was a dirtbag. And I said, you know what? I don't need to do this. I'm not doing anymore. I said, you're a dirtbag. Get yourself another lawyer. I walked out, and I never went into criminal law again. But there were so many other areas. I did workers' comp. I did insurance litigation. I did a lot of personal injury and as I had medical malpractice cases before the limit of $250,000 came in.
So why family law? Why the shift? What got you there?
I'll tell you what happened. So Paul Strumwasser, my partner, committed suicide. 6.5 years after we started practice, it was, he committed suicide the Friday night before I went into labor on Monday, and I delivered Ariel on Thursday. And then I spent 4 months trying to figure out what I'm going to do with the practice, because I found out he hadn't built his clients, he didn't collect any money from, and he was the one, because he had had business before and business acumen, and I was a little girl, what did I know? You know, I come straight out of high school, college, law school, I didn't know anything about finances. And I found out that the practice was in total shambles. So I spent 4 months crying and I kept asking my husband, what should I do? Should I go work for another firm? And he was very smart. He says, you'll figure it out. I'm not going to tell you what to do. And I figured it out that I would never do well in a big firm, because I'd walk down the hallway and I'd tell one of the partners who's a schmuck, you are a schmuck. And that would be the end of me in that law firm. So starting in January, following my partner's death, I kind of pulled myself together. I wasn't bleeding anymore, and I wasn't, it was all these things that happened while, number one, you're depressed, you just gave birth, you almost bled out because you had high blood pressure because of all this stuff, you name it, okay? Comes January, it's kind of like, hello, pull yourself together. That's it. I looked at the cases. I threw out every single one of the cases that he had, which had to do with transactional work. I shipped it out to whatever attorneys. I didn't need any money, nothing. Just take it out of here. And I kept the 3 main areas: personal injury, medical malpractice, and family law and business litigation. Those were the things that I was interested in, because it was litigation. I could shoot my mouth off in court. But eventually, the California Supreme Court came out with Moradi versus Saul, which limited the insurance company's liability if they didn't settle cases, and you couldn't settle cases, and small practices were not going to do well. Medical malpractice, there was the limit of $250,000. And business litigation, which I really loved, I didn't get much of. I did a few trials, but I didn't get much. I did get my name out there. And family law is what I was left with. And family law I knew because from the time that I was a law clerk, in this general practice law firm, they used to give me all their family law cases, because nobody wanted it and nobody knew about it. So I put together their cases. I looked at Stuart Walzer's book on how to do settlement agreements. And I pretty much knew what to do. And by that time I'd been out 7 years. So I knew the lay of the land. And
so then how did you really build the practice in your reputation in the family law community?
So I did a lot of speeches. I did speaking in various community organizations, to synagogues where they don't think divorce should be, but you'd be surprised, a large portion of those people are. And I went to parties. So for example, one of the parties I went to, my husband, at the time he wasn't my husband, he invited me, and he says the partners in his law firm were having a party. I said, oh, okay, I can go and give out my cards. And all of a sudden I hear, oh, from everyone. What happened is they had one of these Hallmark cups with the hot for coffee, and the glue from the handle broke off in the heat of the coffee. And there were all these guys who were screaming because the hot coffee landed in their laps. So what do? I start handing out my cards.
Personal injury, back to personal injury.
That's right. I did. I settled several cases. That's why you gotta have those. That's it. You gotta go out there. You have to tell people all the time, I'm a lawyer. This is the kind of lawyer I am. And you have to let it be known that you love what you're doing. Because if you go out there and you say, oh, it's such another practice, I don't know. But I happen to love what I'm doing. And I happen to love this field because it doesn't limit me to just family law. We have to know something about every single other area of the law. So I may have gotten away from criminal law, but I sure as hell need to know what the criminal law is with respect to certain aspects of our client's case. I don't do personal injury, but I certainly know what will do and what will not do and how it affects the family law case, the litigation. And all of these other areas of the law, you have to know something about it, which means when you look at the advance sheets, you read through everything, if not the whole case, at least the bottom line. So on the top are the summaries of the cases. Look up the arbitrations. What happens in the arbitration? Those are affected. Your family law cases are affected by the decisions in arbitration because a lot of the cases, especially up north, have arbitrations for family law cases. We have to know what goes into an arbitration, what clauses go into an arbitration agreement, what will work, what will not work. As saying I'm going to do arbitration in custody and child support, not going to do you any good because it is not binding. So these are all the things you have to know. Yes, it can get very exhausting. And yes, you go on vacation and you read some of the advance sheets, but it's an exciting thing.
Is that what excites you the most still, like the multidisciplinary nature? Does it still feel new at times?
It does, but I'll tell you what excites me the most. I don't think in all these years, 49 and a half years, I don't think I can say that any of these family law cases are routine. Every one of them are different. They are people, they're not contracts. They are children, they're not disciplines. And these are all people who need help and whose circumstances are each different. Yes, to some extent they're the same, but because people are different from each other, our DNAs are so different, so is our divorce cases. So you remember, you have usually one man and one woman, or two women or two men who are married or who are living together and they want to split apart. The amount of angst and the types of problems they have, in one sense, fits into a little box, in another sense, it doesn't. So that every case that comes in, whether they retain us or not, has elements that are so interesting, so different, that if they can afford us and they decide to retain us, you know you're not going to be bored.
Are you attracted to a certain type of case? Are there cases that you're like, yeah, take it, but I'm not into it, or is there stuff that really gets you going still, or that you feel drawn to?
Well, I'll tell you, we have in our office, we have fabulous lawyers. Of course, my son, who is really into cryptocurrency and NFTs and DAOs, and I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
Well, we can watch his BHBA.
I not only do I watch it, but I look at the PowerPoint and I correct some of the PowerPoint, but I don't understand any of it. So, and he's a brilliant writer and a fabulous analyzer. We have Jenna Spatz, who has been with us for 10 years, and she is amazing. The kinds of things that she gets out of people and out of witnesses is not to be believed. And she also does minors counsel work. So she does a lot of work with children, but also property issues. And then there is Preston Green, who has been with us 5 years, and he is amazing worker. He leaves no stone unturned. So we have Michelle Ordaz, who is our secretary. She's actually a qualified paralegal, but she doesn't want that to be known. So she is a great secretary, and without her, we would collapse.
So the family itself, your practice family, is part of the excitement.
This is, yes, the fact. So, and because there are so few of us, we get together on each of the cases and we email each other in each of the cases. So even though we don't charge the client for going over what's going on, every single case gets emailed to everyone else, excuse me, so that when an issue comes up or we see something, we'll be the one to respond and say, look at this situation, look at that, and see how it could turn out.
So beyond this collaboration that I think is really interesting, let's benefit from your 40 plus years of experience. And it feels like you're just getting started, really. And let's do,
I'm not going anywhere except tomorrow I'm going to Cabo.
Exactly. That's why we had to get you today.
Right.
But what are and this was promised at the top, so I want to make sure I get to it.
Okay.
What are the actual most important Yiddish phrases that every practitioner should know and should not hesitate to pepper their arguments with?
Okay. So I have so many that it was very difficult to get down, but I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry to digress for a minute. I'm going to tell you what happened in one of my cases when Judge Black was still sitting in family law. So my opposition, who wasn't Jewish, calls me up one day and said that his client wanted my client to do such and such. I said, I heard about it. Tell your client not to utz my client's kazachkis out. Okay, wait. Goes into court with Judge Black the next day and writes that I told him to have that his client should drop dead. So we go into chambers and I said to Judge Black, first of all, I'm never talking to this asshole again without somebody else being present. So Judge Black says, do I qualify for being present? I said, sure. I said, this guy says that I told him his client should drop dead. I said, Jews never say that because if it could happen, we're going to feel terrible that we caused somebody's death. I said, I only told him that he shouldn't utz my client's kazachkis out, which means don't bug the shit out of her. So the Judge Black says, no, or you could say, go shit in the ocean. I said, or you can say, you should grow like an onion with your head in the ground. So Judge Black and I are exchanging all these Yiddish expressions, and the poor attorney on the other side doesn't know where he could get underneath the table. So some of the most important expressions I had said is, you're in court and the opposing counsel doesn't want to give you any attorney's fees because he says, this case is going to settle, you don't need any fees. That happened to me. I said, alavai. Alavai means it should only happen. I said this once in front of a Black judge, and I always spell the Yiddish words for the court reporter. And I explained to the judge what it is. And the judge said to me, I know what that means. And so we go into chambers later, and I said, how do you know what alavai means? It's not a usual expression. How do you know that? She said, I grew up in Brooklyn.
There you go.
So these are some of the expressions that you can use, Yiddish expressions. Anybody wants to know some specific Yiddish expressions, I'll be happy to tell them. Because when I came to this country, I learned English and Yiddish at the same time. And that was in Brooklyn. When we came here to California, nobody spoke Yiddish. Now there are some few more people that do. But I don't ever want to leave that Yiddish behind. So I use it as much as I possibly can.
I love it. I love it. And I think that's a good segue into our legal topic for today, which is the intersection between religious law and secular law. You've lectured and written extensively on both Islamic law and Jewish law and how those affect civil family law, both here and in Canada. The articles that everybody got as today's materials, obviously way more comprehensive than we have time to discuss. So let's just start out. What got you interested in that subject, or in the subject of those different legal systems, especially as related to family law?
Okay, so first of all, as you can probably tell, I'm a very angry person. What am I angry about? Injustice. And especially if injustice affects women. And Judaism affects great injustice on women. So when I first started practice, a few years afterwards, I got a case in which a woman was denied a get, the Jewish divorce by her husband. And he said, if you want to get, which is very, very important to a Jewish woman, and she can only get it with the husband giving it to her and giving it to her willingly. The rabbis can't do it. She can't do it. Nobody else can do it. He has to give her this Jewish divorce. Otherwise, she will create what we call mamzerim, which is loosely translated as bastards, but it isn't bastards because there is no bastardy in Jewish religion. These are people who can never get married to other Jews. And not only they, but also all their generations forever. So we call them mamzerim. So you might as well have these kids whose mothers gave birth to them from a man other than the husband to whom she was still married. You might as well put a scarlet M on their foreheads. If they go to Israel, in Israel, the rabbinate keeps tabs on who is a mamzer. A mamzer can never marry another, a Jew can only marry another mamzer. And this is something that sticks to the family. It's the kind of thing that very few Orthodox women would be willing to allow. That means that they are subjects to the whim of the husband. So in this particular case, I saw it firsthand. The guy wanted her to give up all of the property, everything, all support, child support, spousal support, everything. He says, I'll leave you the kids, and then I'll give you the get. And she came to me. By that time, I could have done something about this before, but by the time she came to me, it was too late. I went to the rabbi who was interceding, and I told the rabbi that he made a huge mistake because the husband was willing to give the get before the whole property, before the divorce started. And the rabbi said, no, you have to get a civil divorce first. So I taught him the various areas and the Talmud where he was wrong, and that he has to do this and give whenever a woman, or whenever I send a woman to him, he should give the get right away. So I started reading up on this, and then I realized that there are more than one or two people who would be affected by something like this, and that it is so devastating that women actually give up their properties. I've even had psychologists call me up and say, I don't understand this. This woman is willing to give up her children to this very abusive man so that he would give her a get. So I decided I was going to let lawyers and judges know about this travesty so that they can work with this situation and see what they can do to avoid it on behalf of their clients. It is devastating. It hasn't really been much better, but, and I will give this because this is right hot off the press. Recently, a trial judge ordered the husband to have no custody or visitation with the children because he found that the husband was exercising coercive control by refusing to give a get to the wife. Now, very interesting, the judge who did this wasn't Jewish. I have tried this with other judges who are Jew or who were Jewish, are no longer practicing, and they kept bringing up the Constitution. I said, screw the Constitution. I know what the Constitution says, but you can do something about this, and you should. So this new law about coercive control equals domestic violence could be in the right cases, not all of them. Depends on the circumstances, depends on what he does, depends on what he threatens. But it could be used to get the wife, and by the way, in that case, I understand that the husband gave the get right away. In another case, I will be very honest, Judge Lewis, when he was sitting on the bench, he had a case in which I wrote the objections, and the husband wanted a bifurcated divorce. And Judge Lewis said, did you give your wife a get? And he says, well, that has nothing to do with this. Judge Lewis says, did you give your wife a get? Well, I'm going to. So the Judge Lewis says, oh, I'm going to when everything is arranged. Judge Lewis says, come back when you've given your wife a get. And he did.
So if the get is one of the more unique
divorce, that's explained as a Jewish divorce. And by the way, you can get your civil divorce, you can get all your property, you can get support, you can get custody, but if you don't have a get, which is the Jewish divorce, properly given to you by the husband through the rabbis and getting witnesses and everything else, you're nowhere.
So if that's one of the more unique intersections with the Jewish family law system, what's unique about Islamic family law and the intersection of that system with the secular? So
I'm going to tell you this. I started after I had written this on Jewish divorces. Suzanne Harris came up to me and said the IAFL at the time, IML, was doing a conference. Would you speak on Islamic family law? I said, I don't know anything about Islamic family. I know how to spell Islam. That's it. So I said, okay. She says, nobody else knows anything about this. And you, because you did it, you wrote on Jewish family law, would you do it? So I lectured together with an imam and a postgraduate fellow from Harvard. We lectured in Boston about this issue, and I learned an awful lot. And then at the luncheon following it, people kept coming up to me and say, would you please put what you did, or what you wrote, what you had argued about, would you put it in an article? So I did. And I went and researched. I spent so many of the Jewish law I knew, but the Islamic law I didn't. I even first got a book called Islam for Dummies. And it's I knew absolutely nothing about it. But
so what were your biggest takeaways coming out of that process?
My biggest takeaway is there is a huge comparison between Jewish law, Jewish divorce law, and Islamic divorce law. And in both cases, the woman loses. Bottom line. And in Islamic divorce law is such that they have a mahr, which is first of all, they have a nikah, an agreement between them. And in the nikah agreement, before they get married, he promises to give her a certain amount of money at the time they get married. And if they get divorced, how much more, a lot more he's gonna, it's called the mahr, like a dower. And so we have a number of cases in Canada and the United States arguing about whether this constitutes a prenuptial agreement, whether this constitutes a substitute for spousal support, because under Islamic law, there is no spousal support except for the 3 months following separation, where she cannot remarry. And after that, she doesn't get any support. The only thing she gets is her mahr, her dowry. It's dower, not dowry. And then Child custody rights are interesting in Islamic law because the father has always has legal custody. He can determine whether the kid gets a passport, whether the kid gets inoculations, whether the kid gets anything. And the mother gets custody, physical custody of the child, if it's a boy under the age of 7, or in some countries under the age of above the age of 2. A girl, if the girl is 9 years old or over, and so on. But there are also other things in Islamic law that work against women. And so it was very familiar to me to make the comparison. In the article, I did not make any comparisons, but that would be anathema. But what was interesting is I wrote the article and I sent it to several Islamic scholars and family law scholars in Islam and Muslim countries. And the article that you have is what I came up with. I had to be really careful to make sure that I didn't institute any biases because I was Jewish. So a Jewish person writing about Islamic law is very, very difficult. What was interesting, I got input and I got everything all done. And then since then, a number of people, because I belong to the International Academy of Family Lawyers, so we travel a lot. And I was in Dubai a few years ago, and I met a number of Islamic family law attorneys from different countries. And they took apart the article that I wrote. They said, oh, this one you shouldn't put in, this should be that. But they contradicted each other. Why? Because in each country, different Islamic laws prevail. It's not the same as in Jewish law. In Jewish law, about the get, it's identical no matter where you are.
So I think that we're almost out of time. So I want to ask one final question, maybe bring it all together for us. What advice would you give either your younger self or really younger attorneys now that are just starting out, wanting to focus on family law, wanting to build a practice? What is your best advice to them as they start their career and follow in your footsteps?
Okay. Family law is very, very difficult. If you don't like people, if you don't like children, if you don't like various areas, don't do it. There are plenty of other areas that are a lot less difficult, maybe even make a lot more money. But the important thing for family law is you have to have an interest in people. This is a people law. This is not property law. This is not contract law. Yes, it has elements, but it is people law. We are affecting the lives of our clients' children, of other people that are involved in it. And if you don't like dealing with people, don't do it. And if you do like dealing with people, get your hands wet, get it dirty, and start in every aspect of the client's case. You are a psychologist. You are the therapist, even though I send my clients always to therapy. But initially, you have to understand that they are coming to you for help and they haven't gone anywhere else. So you have to immerse yourself. Take an accounting course. Accounting is very important. Know how to read a financial statement. But most importantly, know, and the area that you didn't touch, which I hadn't told you about, my interest in custody cases have always spanned the interest of the children. And frankly, there have been cases where I tell my client, I don't believe in your case. And I've written articles. I also have articles on my website on how to do a child custody case. And in that, I describe how important it is for the lawyer for the family law attorney to focus in on what is the child's best interest. I know we're not representing the child unless we're minors counsel. But if I'm going to advocate on behalf of a client that I know very well is dangerous or is not in the child's best interest, I tell my client, I'm not going to do it. You can go elsewhere. The guy goes into hide, which means go in good health. Or I'm going to try to convince them that what is going to come across to the judge is how child-centered they are, as opposed to they don't care about the child. All they care about is how to stab the other party in.
Well, I think that's all great stuff. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you for having me. This was fun.
Yeah, it was just so much fun having you here. That wraps it up for today, everybody. Thank you, Alexandra. Thank everybody for watching. Please mark your calendars now and join us for our next episodes, all at 12:30 p.m. Kendra Thomas and Gina King on July 6th, Tony Storm and Tigran Palian on August 3rd, Lisa Meyer on September 7th, Neil Hirsch on October 6th, Melanie Mandels on November 2nd, and Judge Susan Lopez-Giss on December 7th. Of course, thank you to Genna, Kathleen, and Belinda at the bar, the Family Law Executive Committee led by Gina and Kendra, and of course, all of our section sponsors. And again, most importantly, thank you, Alexandra, so much for being here and sharing so much of your story.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Okay, bye, everybody. See you next month.
Bye-bye.